So, welcome back to COMP3020, Professional Ethics in Computing. This is Lecture 7, Part 2, where we're going to start talking about quantitative methods and methodologies. So, hopefully in the last video, we've been able to start thinking about what our assumptions are that are going into our research, what kind of paradigms are going to shape the questions that we're asking, and how we present the analysis. And I know this is all fairly high-level conceptual. It might be quite difficult to wrap your head around if this is your first time thinking about methods in this way. But it's a really useful way to start to think about the research process, because in your future careers, whatever you do, there will always be an opportunity to do research, whether that is choosing a new piece of software for a company, whether it is picking the right language to do some development in, whether it is finding new ways to enhance what you've already created and develop it further, or whether it is simply, asking your boss for a raise. There is always a reason that you need to do research. And so it's good to have an understanding of how research is conducted and understood as a whole, okay? So I wanted to do the methods videos separately because these are probably a little bit easier to wrap your head around, because these are, as we said in the previous video, the specific tools that we'll be using to capture the data. But I really hope that you've been able to kind of understand how the bigger picture affects the way that we pick the tools that we're using. So let's talk about quantitative methods. Quantitative methods are something that you use to try and objectively measure the reality of something. By the end of a quantitative research project, you will have usually numbers, graphs, statistics that are a yes or no answer to a question that you've asked. On the other hand, you have qualitative data, which tends to be more experiential, more focused on subjective understanding of a phenomena, and this tends to be possibly more wordy, is less focused on statistics and numbers, and more focused on kind of feelings and experience. But there's also mixed methods, which takes a little bit of both quantitative and qualitative, and uses them both to enhance one another. So if you have a question that you can answer in a yes or no or numerical form, you can use qualitative methods to then contextualize it and expand it back out and make it kind of apply it. So you may want to just do quantitative methods and have a set answer. You may want to do just qualitative methods and have a more experiential answer, or you may find that you want to do a little bit of both, to kind of feed on the best bits of both worlds. So quantitative methods, there are a huge number of different quantitative methods that you can use. So we've picked out just 5 of the most common ones. One is surveys or questionnaires. So this is where you provide a structured set of questionnaires to respondents, and this is often done on a large scale. So you could send a survey or a questionnaire out to thousands and thousands of respondents, and they would answer the exact same questions in a very structured way, and then you would compare the answers that you received back. Quantitative data can also come from experiments where you manipulate variables and measure the ways that those variables impact the outcome. And this can help you to understand cause and effect. If I change variable A, how does that affect outcome B? You can do observations. Observations in quantitative data are very systematic, and you will systematically record behaviour or phenomena in a controlled environment or in a natural environment, but you will emphasise the quantifiable data that you're collecting. How often did this event happen? How long did this event happen for? How many times did these 2 events occur simultaneously? Those kind of measurable quantitative data sets. You can do interviews. There are 2 kinds of interviews that you might use for quantitative data collection, structured or semi-structured. Structured being that you have a set list of questions that you ask in a set order and get the answers to, and semi-structured being that you do already have a list of questions you want to ask, but if someone brings something up that is novel or that you hadn't thought of before, you might ask additional questions to kind of try and follow up on that a little bit. And interviews are a great way to collect numerical data because they can give you an in-depth understanding of an individual's perspective or experience of the phenomena. So if you don't need to know how lots and lots of people have experienced something, you need to know how a smaller number of people have experienced something in more depth, then interviews are a great way to do that. And then the final one we wanted to share was longitudinal studies. So these are when you examine a subject or a phenomena over a long period of time. So this might be anywhere from a year to several decades. And then you compare the data that you've collected at different points along that time scale, and you observe the changes and trends that have happened over time. And this is a really great way to capture developmental processes and how things kind of evolve. So there are lots of advantages to doing quantitative research. It's very efficient. You can do lots of quantitative data collection very, very quickly. You can get a large amount of data that you can process in a kind of almost automated way. So it's suitable if you have a large sample size that you want to involve in the data collection. Quantitative data is often more objective and reliable. It provides factual information, so that can be replicated and verified. So it can make some very credible research findings that is hard or impossible to argue with because the answers are simply fact. Quantitative data is very generalizable. So because you are collecting so much data and processing it in a very structured way, it means that you can often apply the findings and results that you've had to other groups or to larger populations. So it increases the external validity of the results that you find. Quantitative data also is fantastic for statistical analysis, where you can look for patterns, relationships, statistical significance in the data. You can do lots and lots of ways of comparing the data that you have, changing different variables, and coming out with the statistical analysis that way. It's also fantastic for comparative analysis. You can compare, again, the variables, but you can also examine the relationship between the variables that you've used and the outcomes that you have, so a deep investigation of this cause and effect. And you will also have a lot of control over the limiting variables in quantitative research because it tends to be done in controlled environments or with a strict set of variables that you have controlled. It tends to mean that confounding factors that might affect your data are reduced or mitigated entirely, and so the internal validity of your data sets is fairly strong. There are some disadvantages of quantitative research to be aware of. When you have collected your data and analysed it and present it, you often lose a lot of the context that surrounded that data, so it can be quite difficult to fully understand the nuances of the situation or phenomena that you collected the data within. So you might find that you can't explain how this would be in other settings if you're missing some of the contextual variables that would have shaped it. You also have some limitations around understanding the motivation of the person providing the data or their beliefs or experiences, because again you are quantifying the data that you're having, you're prioritizing the measurable outcomes over the more qualitative experiential ones. Quantitative data is very rigid. You follow a very set protocol. The way that you collect the data is often very structured, and you can't really deviate from that because it will affect your statistical analysis at the end. So it might mean that you miss insights that you start to see pop up in the data, but you aren't able to follow up on them. It's also not very good at capturing complexity because you can only change so many variables within a study. You may find that some variables you're not able to measure, and so you are only left with part of a picture for very, very complex phenomena. And then it's also not very good at addressing specific context. So because the data is so uniform, you might not be able to address the specific cultural or contextual factors that influence it. So it may mean that you can't you can't say that this is true for an entirely different population because you don't have that contextual understanding of the data once you've analysed it. So finally, quality criteria for quantitative research. What are the things that is going to make good quantitative data? Quantitative data that is high quality needs to be valid. So this is about ensuring that the instruments that you're using to measure the data are actually capturing what you want it to measure. They must be generalizable. Findings should be able to be applied to more people than just the people that you have studied. It should be precise. So you have to know the exact measurements that you're using and make sure that the tools that you're using to capture them are very, very precise as well. It must be reliable, so it must be able to be replicated over time, so your instruments that you're using to do the data have to be reliable and replicable. The data has to be objective. There can be no personal bias or no institutional bias within the data at all. It has to be completely impartial and separated from yourself. And again, this is where it's kind of helpful to think about the bigger picture with the ontology, epistemology, and methodology, because you can identify those biases early that you might have and take steps to mitigate them to produce this very neutral, impartial data set. And then finally, it must be replicable. Other people must be able to duplicate the study and get the same results. And when they do, this obviously improves the credibility of your findings. So we've had some examples here of quantitative research methods that we can use to capture objective statistical, numerical, factual answers about a question that you might have. So if the topic that you're investigating, the questions embedded within that, the research questions that we looked at a few weeks ago, if they can be answered with a true or false or with a number, you might find that you want to use some of these quantitative methods, or recommend that your business use some of these quantitative methods in your research action plan. So in the next video, I will be going through the same kinds of questions about qualitative data. So I will see you there in a minute.